I hope you're ready to learn how to read and study the Bible. Today we're in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. If you haven't watched the previous Bible study walkthroughs, I encourage you to watch them, but you don't have to understand what we're doing today. First tip when we approach the Bible, for those of you that are faithful watchers, you already know, read things in context. Know how what we are reading relates to what we have already read, which is Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1, all the way through chapter 2, verse 13, because we're on verse 14. So it starts off like this. Since, therefore, which gives us an indicator, right? When you come across words like that, this acts as a sort of, because this is true, this word likewise is going to tell us something is true. Almost like a cause-effect kind of statement. Not really, but almost like a reason-result is a more accurate way of explaining what this acts as. So when you read the Bible, you come across words like since or therefore. It's letting you know because this is true, therefore what we can conclude is that, B is true. So since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, okay, which becomes our first, I don't know how to say it, but I'm going to highlight it, okay. Since orange is true, which I highlighted in orange so that we can differentiate, likewise, or since the children share in flesh and blood, let's use blue. That way it's very distinct. Then he himself likewise partook of the same things. Okay, that's how the statement goes. In other words, because the children, and you go, what children? Well, the children referenced in verse 13, so make sure you keep track of repeating words and ideas and don't lose sight of what's already been said, right? Tip number 2. So we've already been talking about the children that Jesus has been given by the Father, those who have been sanctified, right? Those whom he's not ashamed to call brothers, as we saw in verse 11. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, in other words, are human beings made in God's image, he himself likewise partook of the same things, right? And then what I'm going to do is highlight in yellow, rather I'm going to circle in pink, so that, I know the word so isn't there, but this functions as a so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. So we're going to park it in verse 14 and 15, and we're going to unpack this, and hopefully along the way you'll have much more clarity on how to read and study the Bible. So again, as we back it up, the since therefore acts as a because this is true, B is true. So I'm going to just write A, this is true, therefore B is going to have to be true or something that takes place. Right? Since the people Jesus redeems, the children, share in flesh and blood, they are human beings made from the dirt, actual, physical beings. He himself, right, is going to have to partake of the same things. And you go, why is that a conclusion that the author has come to? Like, why is it that B follows A? Why is this premise something that we can agree on? And obviously the conclusion is something that the author's putting forth. Why is that true? Well, he's going to make a statement about it, right? It's so that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil. That's statement number 1. It reads like this: Jesus is able to destroy the one who has the power of death. He's able to destroy the devil and deliver all those who used to be subject to lifelong slavery. And you and I ask, well, why? Well, because he himself partook of the same things. Since the people he's saving or freeing from the power of the devil share in flesh and blood as well, he himself has to also. So, so we connect this idea of Jesus essentially being a human in order to rescue humans, in order to save them from the power of the devil, right? We connect those ideas to the surrounding context. This is what we do as Bible students. We think about what's been put forth. Let's just stay localized to chapter 2. What has been said and what are the main ideas we've seen in chapter 2 so far? Well, Jesus, sanctifying, those being sanctified by the Father, Jesus being the founder of our salvation. We should not neglect the great salvation we have. Jesus is above angels, right? Those ideas, if you've been following with us, are going to somehow relate to this, that Jesus had to be one of us and partake of the same things we have, being flesh and blood, right? And when you read the Bible, ask questions like that. What are the same things he's partaking in? Well, what's the thing that he said before this? Children share in flesh and blood. So it makes sense that Jesus participates in, has also the same things being flesh and blood. And because that's true, it's so that, this is why he partakes of flesh and blood, it's so that through death, he destroys the one who has the power of death. So immediately what I see are a few times a certain word is used. I'm going to highlight this in blue, and then I'm going to circle it in pink so it stands out. Okay? Death. Death. Okay? And then I see, oh, what a surprise. Death. 3 times in just these 2 little verses, the word death is used. What does that tell me? Well, as Bible students, we should pay attention to repeating words, because that will often indicate to us what is one of the main points about this verse. This has to do with death. Well, what about death? Jesus destroys the one who has the power of death. Well, who's that? He explicitly tells us right here, if you keep reading, it says the devil. What does it mean that the devil has the power of death? That's a question to ask. Maybe the rest of Hebrews or the rest of this chapter will clarify. What does it mean that the devil has the power of death? Is it the power to inflict death? Is it the power to ultimately, have dominion over death? In what way does he have power, the power of death? These are questions. When you read the Bible, ask questions. Another thing we need to think about is, since death is repeated and Jesus is destroying the one who has death, being the devil here, right? This is only possible because of the fact that he partakes of flesh and blood. So in other words, when you read the Bible, there's oftentimes biblical authors will have layers of reasoning. So for instance, it goes like this: because Jesus partakes of flesh and blood, right? Since that's true, well, now, so that, or it doesn't even make sense like that, but because he takes on flesh and blood, he is able to, through death, destroy the one who has the power of death. So through death is very important, because we ask the question, when you read a text, ask as many questions as you can. How does Jesus destroy the one who has the power of death? Well, through death. How is death possible? Because he partook of flesh and blood. He subjected himself to the possibility of dying by taking on human nature, right? Flesh and blood. And by doing so, he can destroy, for the children who share in flesh and blood, he can destroy the one who has the power of death, the devil. So maybe another question we ask is, what does it mean? What does it mean? Just a question we're going to ask. What does it mean that he destroys the one who has the power of death, being the devil? Well, I think verse 15 will help us understand what that means. But I hope, as much as my brain isn't working today as I want it to, I hope you're at least tracking along. It says, and not only does he destroy the power of death, or destroy the devil, but this is a second thing he does. This is action number 2. Action number 1 is that he destroys death, right? Technically, action number 0.5, which we'll put number 0, is that he partakes of flesh and blood. Then he dies to destroy the power of death. And he delivers all those who through the fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. So do you see the flow of the statements? When you read the Bible, try to make sense of how the ideas flow together, almost how they're being progressively unpacked, or how the author is progressively explaining an idea and clarifying and expanding upon it. Like he clarifies as he's going what it means that he destroys the power of death, the one who has the power of death being the devil. Well, part of that includes he delivers all those who used to be subject to lifelong slavery, used to be afraid of death. He delivers them. That's part of what it means that he destroys the devil who has the power of death. It's a setting free. So something I would do if I were reading this for the first time is I might look at this word deliver. I might go to a Greek lexicon and choose a good one. I've been told that Strong's is not entirely fantastic, so do what you will with that. But I would go to a Greek lexicon and go, what does the word deliver mean in the Greek? What the word that's used here, translated into deliver in our English language, what does it mean? What does it mean? Do I see it used throughout the rest of Hebrews? I want to make sense of what this word means, because that's key to understanding what Jesus does to destroy the power of the devil and his power of death, is that he delivers us who used to be, have the fear of death, who used to be subject to lifelong slavery. He delivers us. And so it seems to be clear as you read what he delivers us from. It's that he's delivering us from the fear of death and from lifelong slavery. So a question I have is, if I can write here, enslaved to what? Does the text indicate to us what we're being saved in, what we used to be enslaved to? It's a terrible what. It's not even English. What did we used to be enslaved to? What did he set us free from? These are questions to ask because, again, this relates to what it means that Jesus took on human flesh to rescue and deliver us from something. And it relates to us being children given to Jesus by the Father. Right, and this ultimately goes back to, as you zoom out a little bit beyond this text, you think about, well, what has chapter 2 told me as some main points? Well, that Jesus sanctifies those who trust in him, and he does that through suffering. Right, so something to think about is, have I seen death already? Have I seen this word used in chapter 2 alone? The concept of Jesus dying or suffering or going through death. And the answer is, yeah, I have. If you back it up to verse 9, it talks about Jesus, who was made lower than angels and crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of what? Of death. And by the grace of God, he's tasted what? Death for everyone. So by going back and thinking about how the author talks about death and how he talks about Jesus dying, it will help me piece this together by the time I get here, what it means that Jesus has gone through death. Well, he suffered, right? Well, he actually, tasted death for everyone. It was for a purpose. It was for the benefit of others. And by doing so, he destroys the power of the devil, sets us free, delivers us who used to, through the fear of death, were subject to lifelong slavery. This word through, and then we're done, is very important, because this explains the means by which we were subject to lifelong slavery. So how were we subject to lifelong slavery? Through the fear of death. This fear of death is connected to the idea of being subjected to lifelong slavery. This fear of death relates to what it is we used to be enslaved to. Right, this fear of death. So think about that and let me know in the comments your guys' thoughts as we just continue meditating on Scripture and trying to make sense of what the passage is saying. If you begin to piece this all together, and I know I don't have time to go through the whole chapter, but with these 10-minute videos, go back and piece these sections together and start to make sense of the one long, thread that the author is wanting us to see. One big idea, which is, again, Jesus is better than angels. He's supreme. There's a great salvation we shouldn't neglect. And I want to think about how this relates to that, how this relates to us being children or brothers of Jesus and sisters, right? How this relates to us being sanctified, how this relates to the great salvation we have or we should not neglect, right? How this relates to Jesus suffering and being better than angels. I want to think about that. So let me know in the comments your guys' thoughts about how these ideas all come together, how they relate, how they connect. Let me know what you think it is that he's specifically touching on that we used to be enslaved to in a lifelong sense. And so just a bunch of things to think through. And this is good because it makes you pause, it makes you meditate, it makes you ask questions and pray and search the Scriptures instead of speeding through and getting nothing out of it. I hope this will teach you how to read the Bible well. In the description below and on our website, abovereproachministry.com, we have a completely free 40-day in-depth Bible study course. It's self-paced. You can go as fast or as slow as you want. We also have a 27-day program and 11-day program. Go check it out. We have a bunch of other free resources on our website or linked in the description below. And I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walkthrough.